Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm here with Dr. Angel Smith. He is the Director of Virgin Island Studies and President of HLSCC, Dr. Carl Dawson. Welcome to Spotlight. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good night.
Yes, you got a big event coming up, a National Day of Remembrance for the Fancy Me. Why we have this now?
Well, of course, when you look at the role of the college as far as the community is concerned, it goes far beyond the teaching and learning process, because as the only the main post-secondary institution in the territory, we have a responsibility as far as informing the community, helping to build our identity even as Virgin Islanders. And even as with our most recent strategic plan, one of those goals in there relates to community relations and nation building. And so we, of course, have at the college the Virgin Islands Maritime Museum. Mm-hmm. And so that this has been an area of focus for us, the maritime history. And even as you visit the museum, you'll notice that one of the things that we feature is, in fact, the loss of the schooner Fancy Me, which was the greatest maritime tragedy in the history of the Virgin Islands. But in addition to that, we will be looking at other things, other maritime tragedies, which Dr. Smith will explain. But certainly, as far as the college is concerned, we see this very much as part of our mission, making sure that people, we bring into focus significant events in the life and times of the Virgin Islands.
Yeah. I want to take this minute to give the Marine Museum a plug, because I go there every week. Of course, we meet in that area by a monthly basis, and I'm amazed every time I pass through there. I have to stop and look at the pictures and look at the tools and the boat, the parts of the boats, and how it shows you how the boats are being built, and the timber and how everything was done.
Yeah.
And you know, whenever you go ahead, Dr. Dawson, and encourage people to come to the museum, because the museum is the bomb. And when you hear me talk about Virgin Islands ingenuity and creativity and resourcefulness and resilience, that museum is the epitome of those adjectives.
Yeah. And I think too, when you tour the museum too, especially for persons of Virgin Islands descent, you realize that it's not just the industry, the skills and the trade, but it's the people as well.
Yeah.
And you may see someone who you're familiar with, a relative, may be there on the Wall of Fame. On the Wall of Fame that has been developed by Mr. Jeff Brooks, who's the curator of the museum. But as you plug for that, I'll plug another, in sense, a little known secret of the college that not on that side, but on the other side, we have the H.L. Stout Memorial Room.
Yes.
And I think not enough Virgin Islanders have been able to go into that room. I think we've encouraged the library. We would have it open on special occasions, but we try to have it open even more and make sure that, of course, anyone who comes and requests to see it can always see it, so that they can see a little bit more too of the life and times of H. Lafferty Stout.
Yeah. What was the Fancy Me? Talk us about the Fancy Me.
Okay, well, the celebration, I should say the commemoration, I should correct myself there. The commemoration, the loss of the Fancy Me, it's an event for us to look at the maritime heritage of the Virgin Islands, to focus on the maritime heritage, and as Dr. Dawson talked about, the fact that at the Virgin Islands Studies Institute at the college, we are charged with doing that community outreach, sharing information with the public, ensuring that we learn new things all the time about our history. And through the Maritime Museum, we have all this information that has been collected over the years. Now, the Fancy Me could be described as one of the largest boats that was built in the Virgin Islands around that time.
Who built it?
It was built by the Smith family. Okay. It was built in St. Thomas, and I think that because of the size of the boat, St. Thomas would have given them easier access to the material that they needed. So it was built in St. Thomas, and that boat operated between the Virgin Islands and the then Dominican Republic, where they traveled regularly as a passenger boat.
Forgive me, when you say Smith family, who Smith you're talking about?
This is the Smiths on the western end of the island, which would be the Dr. Smith's family, that whole Smith family,
Okay.
which includes my family. The family was split in two, as it were. There was a section here on Tortola, and there was a section in St. Thomas. So our great-grandfather, he was living in St. Thomas at the time, and he and his sons built this boat. Now, they operated what could be considered a ferry boat, because it carried passengers to and from the Dominican Republic. People went to the Dominican Republic on work details. They went and they worked during the main part of the season, as it's reaping the cane from the fields. There are persons who were cutting cane. There were persons who worked in the factories as engineers and different levels. So
my grandfather was one of them.
Yeah,
Oscar Penn.
and it is interesting because when we talk to some of the older people, they started giving us the details about their work in the Dominican Republic, and we realized that it was not just cane cutters. They worked at all levels of the industry, the sugar industry. So persons would go to the Dominican Republic, and they would go in from about January, and that was the main season, and they would work for about 6 months. Where the harvest, the cane has to come in, the sugar processed and all that. And then at the end of the harvest, they came back to Tortola. Now, the time that we're looking at, because the date that we're commemorating is the 25th of July. And when we think about it, we realize that, that's in coming close to the August season,
Yes.
which was a time of celebration here in the Virgin Islands, because that's when they celebrated emancipation. So these persons were working in the Dominican Republic, and they were now coming back. They finished working, they're coming back to their families. And there were persons who were living in the Dominican Republic also, because there are those who went on a short-term basis and came back. There were those who lived there.
Yes.
But at the same time, you could get back in because this was the boat's schedule. So they were coming back to Tortola. They had about 80 persons on board. So which tells you that this wasn't a small boat.
Yes.
And it got caught in a hurricane. It was described as an early season hurricane, where what was happening was that as they left in the Friday evening, as they left, then when they got to a certain point, they realized that the weather was changing, so they turned back for the safety of one of the harbors. And then when the storm came, they tried to ride out the storm, and the boat eventually was lost. And as a result of that, there were about 59 persons who drowned. Now,
That was saved?
for the 59 of the passengers drowned, and the crew drowned, including the captain, because it is said that the captain went down with his ship. And the older men in the village will tell you that the captain always goes down with his ship.
Right.
So it's one of those things.
So how would the others say?
They by different means, because it was, by the time this happened, it was dark, it was in the night. So people, try to cling on to life however best way they could, and some people managed to make it to shore, but the majority of the persons died. And that must
have been a really sad,
that was a major
tragic event.
Yeah, that was a tragic event, because when the news of the sinking of the Fancy Me eventually, because this was outside, this was like way outside of the center of population. So by the time the news got into the center and then came into St. Thomas through the agents, by the time it got to St. Thomas, then it got to Tortola. Remember, now we're not talking the time of telephones. So when the news got to Tortola, well, that was a different story, because it is said that every family in the Virgin Islands was affected one way or another. We've heard stories growing up about persons shouting the news up into the hills, that the Fancy Me sink, the Fancy Me sink, and then the other person just simply shouting, going down or coming up, going down or coming up, because it meant that if it was going down, there were not as many passengers going down. But now it was coming up.
Yeah.
Oh, so when you hear coming up, you know,
And you're thinking of your own people
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
might be on board.
Yeah.
because you know there was someone who you knew went down, who was there, would be coming up on the Fancy Me. So you know, those are some of the stories that we've heard growing up as children, where they talked about this, the Fancy Me, the sinking of the Fancy Me, and we thought that this year commemorates 90 years since that event, a major event in Virgin Islands history. And we thought that it would be a good opportunity for us to honor the memory of our ancestors in this way, because here are persons who, you know, were the trailblazers, persons who kept these islands going, who lost their lives in so doing just to support their family. And you would think that some families would have been affected by that forever.
So you're talking about, along with the social impact of the sadness, the tragedy, the loss of male figures in particular in the community, fathers. They would have had a tremendous social impact on the community. The children growing up fatherless, and the mothers and the wives without their husband and so on. So that must have been a... And then, of course, there was the economic impact.
Right.
Short term and long term.
Yes.
Short term because people were holding on, waiting for that money to come from Dominican Republic, and it was the end of season, people coming home with money.
And probably lots and lots of all the money that they had to
Everything's
last them for the whole season.
That was because you worked for 6 months, and then you came back and you lived for another 6 months. So that was money that tied you over. And when they came back, then they continued their cultivations, they did whatever, but that was ready cash. You know, we talk about stories where persons who would been to Santo Domingo and they returned, they built themselves houses, you know, because they were working there and they started, because that was cash in hand. That was the only means of getting ready cash. You went and you worked and you came back, you know, but BVI was still your home in some cases. So you went there, you worked, you came back, you built your house. And so we're talking about the impact that would have had on the BVI community, and that would have lasted for a period of time. And in fact, where you talked about the fact, and that's why, you know, even growing up in the 60s and the 70s, we heard about it because people were still talking about it.
And there were people alive that we knew, you know,
who survived.
In our area, Mr. Joe Lloyd, Joseph Lloyd, one of those persons. And as you said, when you think on 59 souls, 59 persons lost, in this, that's 59 out of 30,000. At that time, you have to remember what the population of the Virgin Islands was.
About 4,000 or 5,000.
4,000 or 5,000 people or so. So it was very, very significant.
That was a large number.
Every family, even my own family, my father's mother's brother, my mother's father's brother, you know, every family was touched in the Virgin Islands.
So you had this commemoration on the 25th of this month.
On the 25th
of July. And where is it going to be?
It's going to be at the Marine Center. So we're going to do it again as an opportunity to highlight the Maritime Museum, because that's where the museum is located. And we're going to do it at 9 in the morning.
And what is the planned activity?
It's going to be, we're hoping that it would be a short ceremony with some speeches, which we hope would be very short, that speaks to our heritage, the maritime heritage of the Virgin Islands, that speaks to the same things that you talk about, the ingenuity of our forefathers, even in terms of boat building, and then about the economic ties that the Virgin Islands had developed with other Caribbean countries, because what we were seeing in this period of time is that the Virgin Islands, the economy of the Virgin Islands was not as advanced as it is today, and persons then had to seek their fortune, as it were, elsewhere. And we are seeing that here Virgin Islanders, they went out to do so. So the speeches we are hoping would focus on, the addresses would focus on those areas, and then a solemnness of the event, we want to be able to recall the names of these individuals.
So you have
we have the names. We have the names, and we, as we said, as Dr. Dawson mentioned earlier when he spoke, was that we are using the data for the Fancy Me, which is the 25th of July, and it's the 90th anniversary of the sinking of the Fancy Me. But as we focus on the Fancy Me, we recognize that there were a few other boats that went down in similar circumstances. So we're going to pull out those information, and we're going to again bring those names to the forefront, and so that we have the commemoration of those persons who were lost at sea during this period from about 1902 to about 1942. And we have about 6 boats in total.
Okay. And this activity is expected to last a couple of hours? Is
About an hour. The ceremony itself should go for about an hour. And as I said, the longest part of it would be to recite the names, because we have about 59 names from about 50 names, because there were a few still that were missing. But we have about 50 names from the Fancy Me. We have about 30 names from the Perseverance. And then we have small amounts from some of the other boats.
Yeah, and of course, the persons attending the ceremony will get a chance to browse through the museum and see the maritime history, the rich maritime history.
That's the idea
of the territory.
Yeah.
That's great. And again, that's January the 25th.
July the 25th.
July the 25th. I don't know where January came from.
9 a.m.
At 9 a.m. and that's at HLSCC Maritime Museum.
Yes, at the Marine Center. So it's if you're traveling from west to east, it's on the right side of the road, the first college building that you meet.
Cool. Okay. Any beyond the turning the clock? Any things that we missed out?
If I could, I would just also say that it's an opportunity, I believe, for persons in the territory to try to reconnect with their own heritage. To say if they had family members lost in that tragedy. Just 2 years ago, our family the Reimers had a reunion. And that was an opportunity for a lot of the younger ones to find out that, yes, we had an Uncle Thomas went down on the Fancy Me, and that's something that's now resounding in the family. And I think that that opportunity is there for a number of other persons in the territory who simply may not know that was a part of their family history.
It's a common remember.
Yes.
Yeah. And reconnect, so to speak.
And we're hoping that we start something. We have the records, and these are the records that we have. There are other information that we need to collect. There are other tragedies. There are other persons who were lost at sea. But it's an opportunity for us to start a dialogue and then to start gathering additional information, so that when we do a commemoration like this, we can include others. So so that we save that information in terms of the history.
I'll add one thing, because I see Dr. Smith has here the book Such Are the Hours to Find Peace by Dr. Janet Smith, written with a lot of the notes made by her own father, Mr. Wilfred Smith. And this is the sort of leading resource on the Fancy Me. So
and this is available.
It's available at the college bookstore and other bookstores, I think, in the territory. But certainly I can say at the college bookstore.
Such are the
hours to find peace.
By Dr. Janet Smith.
Dr. Janet Smith. Yeah.
Cool. Dr. Angel Smith, Dr. Cal Dawson, thanks for stopping by and sharing that historic information with us. And of course, we're looking forward to July the 25th at 9 a.m. at the Marine Center to commemorate the loss of the Fancy Me and to celebrate the ingenuity and the creativity and the history of our people during that time. Yes, indeed. Next week, the spotlight will shine on the BVI Prince and Princess Show. We will have a group of interesting and talented young boys and girls vying for the prestigious title, so be sure to be here or be square. That's going to be interesting. This, of course, is pageant season. In the next couple of weeks, where we're going to have the Prince and Princess Show next week. The week after, we're going to have the Miss BVI contestants coming by for us to interview them on Spotlight. And after that, we're going to take a brief break for the Emancipation celebration and then come back in the middle of August. So keep it locked there to Spotlight. I want to remind you that Spotlight is seen Tuesdays at 8 p.m. here on JTV Channel 55 and rebroadcast every Sunday afternoon at 2:30. You can also watch Spotlight on demand at jtvlive.net. Like our Facebook page, facebook.com/SpotlightBVI. Find out about our upcoming guests, and you can suggest topics and guests of your own. I'm Andrew, reminding you that when the spotlight is on, you see the facts. Peace and blessings.
Spotlight is brought to you by CCTBVI, Life Unlimited, and the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, the official Bank of Paradise.